You are on HOA nuisance files. The tow hook was inches away. I am not the one you bully. That is what I said the first time Angela screamed in my face in the Harbor Pointe parking lot, and she did not even blink. She just smiled, tapped her clipboard, and told me the next step after towing was a hearing and she could do both in one day. The tow truck was already backing into position behind my car, amber strobe flashing across the asphalt, and I could see the driver unspooling the chain like he had done this 100 times before. Angela stood there in her purple windbreaker with her arms crossed, her red hair catching the midday sun. And she looked happier than I had ever seen another human being look while ruining someone's day. My name is Derek. I work as a paramedic in Portland, and up until 3 weeks ago I thought Harbor Pointe HOA was just another set of annoying rules I could ignore as long as I kept my lawn trimmed and my garbage cans out of sight. I was wrong. Angela Jones is the communications director for the board, which means she controls every email blast, every notice, every fine letter, and every tow authorization that goes out to the residents. She has a small handheld stamp she uses to mark violations as official, and she slams it down on paper like a judge with a gavel. The sound of that stamp hitting a clipboard is the last thing you hear before your life gets complicated. I moved into Harbor Pointe 6 months ago because the complex was close to the hospital and the rent was manageable. The rules seemed standard. Guest parking required a pass. Residents needed a decal. Fire lanes were marked red. Street parking was banned overnight. Fine. I bought the decal, stuck it on my windshield, and figured I was done. But Angela has a different relationship with the rules. For her, they are not guidelines. They are traps. She walks the lot every morning with her clipboard and her stamp, looking for anything out of place. A car 1 inch over the line. A decal that is faded. A guest pass that expired yesterday. And once she finds you, she does not let go. 3 weeks ago, I came home from a 12-hour shift and parked in my assigned spot. The lines were freshly painted. I was dead center. I took a picture because I was tired and paranoid, and I had heard stories about Angela from my neighbor. The next morning, I walked out to find a bright orange sticker on my windshield that said violation in huge letters at the top, and below that a wall of text I could not read because it was covered in legal jargon and HOA code references. I peeled it off and threw it in the trash. 2 days later, I got an email blast from Angela with my license plate number and a line that said failure to comply will result in towing and additional fees. I called the management company. They told me Angela filed the violation because the parking lines were repainted incorrectly and my car was technically in violation of the fire lane clearance rule even though I was inside the painted lines. I asked how that was my fault. The woman on the phone sighed and said Angela does not care whose fault it is, she just enforces what she sees. I asked what I was supposed to do. She said move my car or risk a tow. I said I was parked in my assigned spot and I was not moving. She said that was my choice and hung up. That night, I got another email. This one had a photo attachment. It was my car, taken from an angle that made it look like I was half in the fire lane. The email said I had 24 hours to move or face immediate towing. I did not move. I was tired. I was angry. And I work nights, which means I need to sleep during the day, and moving my car every time Angela decided the paint was wrong was not sustainable. My job is on the line, because the HOA chaos keeps interrupting my work and sleep. I had already been written up twice for being late because I was stuck dealing with HOA nonsense, and my supervisor made it clear that one more incident would mean a formal review. The next morning, I walked out and found the tow truck. Angela was standing next to it, talking to the driver, pointing at my car like she was giving a briefing. I walked up and asked what the hell was happening. She turned to me, smiled, and said I had been notified, and I chose not to comply. I said I was parked in my spot. She said the spot was in violation. I said that did not make sense. She said it did not have to make sense, it just had to be enforced. Then she pulled out her stamp, slammed it onto a clipboard, and handed me a slip of paper that said my car was being towed for non-compliance and I would be responsible for all fees. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Angela did not care. She kept talking, explaining that Harbor Point has a zero-tolerance policy for parking violations and that she has all day. And so does her fine meter. I asked if she was seriously going to tow a car that was parked inside the lines. She said the lines were wrong and that was not her problem. I said I had a picture proving I was centered. She said pictures do not override HOA rules. I said this was insane. She said I could file an appeal at the next board meeting in 2 weeks. I said 2 weeks. She said yes, and in the meantime my car would be at the tow yard and I would be responsible for daily storage fees. The driver looked uncomfortable. He was a young guy, maybe mid-20s, and he kept glancing between me and Angela like he was waiting for permission to stop. I asked him if he was really going to tow a legally parked car. He shrugged and said he just does what the HOA tells him. Angela jumped in and said the contract was clear and he was authorized. I asked to see the authorization. She handed me another slip of paper, this one with her signature and the HOA logo at the top, and a line that said resident in violation of parking ordinance. No specifics. No code reference. Just a blanket claim. I let her talk, because every word was helping me. I kept my phone up, recording everything, and I made sure to get clear shots of the clipboard, the truck, and Angela's face. She noticed and asked what I was doing. I said I was documenting the interaction. She said that was fine, she had nothing to hide. I said good, then you will not mind if I submit this to the board. She laughed and said she was the board, at least the part that mattered, and no one was going to overrule her. That was when I realized this was not about parking. This was about power. Angela had decided I was a problem, and she was going to make an example out of me. I asked why. She did not answer. She just turned back to the driver and told him to finish the job. The wheel lift engaged with a hydraulic hiss, and I watched my car start to rise off the pavement. I asked how much the tow would cost. Angela said that depended on how long it took me to pay the fine and retrieve the car. I asked what the fine was. She said $200 for the violation, plus $50 a day for storage, plus the tow fee, which was another $150. I said that was over $500 for parking in my own spot. She said I should have moved when I was told. I called the police, the non-emergency line. I explained the situation and asked if the HOA had the legal right to tow a car from a private assigned spot. The dispatcher said it depended on the HOA rules and the management contract, and that I should contact a lawyer if I felt the tow was improper. I asked if an officer could come out and at least document the scene. She said she would send someone, but it might take a while. Angela overheard and laughed. She said the police would not help me because the HOA was within its rights. I said we would see. The officer showed up 20 minutes later. By then, my car was fully lifted and the driver was securing the chains. The officer was a middle-aged guy with a tired expression, and he looked at Angela, then at me, then at the truck, and sighed. He asked what was going on. I explained. Angela interrupted and said I was in violation and she had the authority to tow. The officer asked to see the authorization. She handed him the clipboard. He looked at it for a long time, then looked at me and asked if I had proof I was parked legally. I showed him the picture on my phone. He nodded, looked back at Angela, and said this looks like a civil matter and he could not stop the tow unless there was evidence of a crime. Angela smiled. She said see, and then she told the driver to take the car. I asked the officer for an incident number. He hesitated. then said he could file a report if I wanted, but it would not change anything. I said I wanted the report. He wrote down my information and Angela's information and the truck's plate number, then handed me a slip with a case number on it. Angela said this was a waste of time. The officer looked at her and said, "Ma'am, I am just doing my job, and if you have a problem with that, you can file a complaint." She shut up. The officer left. The truck pulled away with my car. I stood there in the empty spot, holding my phone and the incident report slip, and I realized I had just lost round one. But I also realized something else. Angela had just handed me everything I needed to fight back. She had towed my car in front of a police officer, on camera with no valid violation, and she had done it while gloating. I had her on record saying she was the board and no one could overrule her. I had the officer's case number. I had my photo proving I was parked legally. And I had a neighbor who had been texting me the whole time, saying she saw everything and she would testify if I needed her to. Her name is Brenda. She lives 2 units down, and she has been dealing with Angela for 3 years. She texted me that night and said Angela has done this before, and people fold every time. She said Angela uses the management company and the tow vendor together to create a paper trail that looks official, and most people just pay the fines because fighting costs more than giving in. She said the last guy who fought Angela ended up with a lien on his property and had to sell. I said I was not folding. She said good, because she had receipts. Brenda sent me a folder of documents. Emails from Angela threatening other residents. Tow authorizations with missing signatures. Board meeting minutes where Angela voted to approve contracts without a quorum. A spreadsheet tracking fines that did not match the amounts residents actually paid. She said she had been collecting this stuff for months, but she did not know what to do with it. I said I knew exactly what to do with it. I needed to talk to a lawyer. I called 3 lawyers the next day. 2 of them said HOA disputes were not worth their time. The third one, a guy named Paul who specialized in property law, said he would take a look for a flat consultation fee. I sent him everything. The video. The photos. Brenda's documents. The incident report. He called me back 2 hours later and said I had a case, but it was going to be messy. He said the management company Angela was using had a history of contract violations, and the tow vendor was under investigation for predatory practices. He said if I wanted to fight, I needed to be ready for Angela to escalate. I said she already escalated. He said no, she just got started. He was right. The next day I got an email from the management company saying I owed $600 in fines and fees, and if I did not pay within 7 days my account would be sent to collections. I called Paul. He said do not pay anything. He said paying would be an admission of liability and it would kill the case. I said I needed my car. He said we would get the car, but first we needed to file a complaint with the management company and demand a formal hearing. He drafted the complaint and I sent it that night. Angela responded within an hour. She sent an email to the entire complex with my name in the subject line, and a paragraph explaining that I was refusing to comply with HOA rules, and that my behavior was creating a safety hazard. She said the board was considering additional penalties including a ban on guest parking privileges and a lien on my unit. I forwarded it to Paul. He said this is harassment, and we can use it. I said good. He said but it is also a sign that Angela is panicking, and when she panics she gets dangerous. 2 days later, I got a knock on my door. It was a guy in a security uniform, holding a clipboard. He said he was with the management company and he needed to inspect my unit for code violations. I asked if he had a warrant. He said he did not need a warrant. The HOA rules allowed for inspections with 24 hours notice. I said I never got notice. He showed me an email timestamp from Angela, sent at midnight the night before. I said that was not 24 hours. He shrugged and said he was just doing his job. I said he could come back with proper notice or he could leave. He left. But I knew Angela was not done. That night, I got another email. This one said the board was scheduling an emergency meeting to discuss my non-compliance, and that I was required to attend. The meeting was in 3 days, on a Tuesday night at 7. I work Tuesday nights. I replied and said I could not attend and requested a reschedule. Angela replied and said the meeting was mandatory and failure to attend would result in automatic penalties. I forwarded it to Paul. He said this is retaliation and we need to document everything. He said he would attend the meeting on my behalf if I gave him power of attorney for HOA matters. I signed the paperwork. Paul showed up at the meeting with a briefcase and a recorder. He told me later that Angela tried to shut him down the second he walked in. She said the meeting was for residents only, and lawyers were not allowed. Paul said he was there as my representative and under Oregon law he had the right to attend any meeting where penalties were being discussed. Angela said this was not a penalty meeting, it was a compliance review. Paul said call it whatever you want, I am staying. One of the other board members, a guy named Frank, told Angela to let it go. She did, but Paul said she looked furious. The meeting lasted 2 hours. Paul recorded the whole thing. Angela presented her case. She said I had repeatedly violated parking rules, refused to comply with notices, and created a hostile environment by threatening legal action. Paul asked for the specific rule I violated. Angela cited a section of the HOA bylaws about fire lane clearance. Paul asked for the measurements proving my car was in violation. Angela said she did not have measurements. She had a visual assessment. Paul asked if the visual assessment was documented. Angela said it did not need to be. Her authority as communications director was sufficient. Paul said that is not how enforcement works. Angela said it was in Harbor Pointe. Frank interrupted. He said he had reviewed the parking lot map and the fire lane rule did not apply to my spot. Angela said the map was outdated. Frank said the map was updated last year and it was the official record. Angela said the map was wrong. Frank said we cannot enforce rules based on a map you claim is wrong without proof the map is wrong. Angela slammed her stamp on the table. She said she had been enforcing these rules for 5 years and no one had questioned her before. Paul said maybe they should have. That was when the meeting fell apart. Another board member, a woman named Carol, said she was uncomfortable with how Angela was handling the situation. Angela said Carol did not understand the pressure she was under. Carol said the pressure was not an excuse to violate due process. Angela said there was no due process required for parking violations. Paul said actually, there is, and if the board proceeded with penalties without a proper hearing, he would file a lawsuit on my behalf. Angela said he was bluffing. Paul said try me. The meeting ended with no decision. Frank said they would table the issue until the next regular meeting, and in the meantime I would not be subject to any additional penalties. Angela said that was unacceptable. Frank said it was done. Angela stormed out. Paul called me on the way home and said we just bought time, but Angela was going to come back harder. He was right again. The next morning, I found another orange sticker on my windshield. This one said second notice in huge letters and below that a wall of text threatening immediate towing if I did not move my car within 12 hours. I peeled it off and called Paul. He said this is harassment and we are going to stop it. He drafted a cease and desist letter and sent it to Angela, the management company, and the tow vendor. The letter said any further towing attempts without a valid violation and proper notice would result in a lawsuit for harassment, trespass, and conversion. Angela ignored it. 2 days later, I came home from a shift and found my car gone. Again, no notice, no email. Just an empty spot and a bright orange sticker stuck to the pavement where my car had been. I called Paul. He said we are done playing nice. He filed a complaint with the Oregon Department of Justice and a lawsuit in small claims court. The complaint alleged that the management company was operating without a valid contract and that Angela was abusing her authority to harass residents. The lawsuit demanded the return of my car, reimbursement for all towing and storage fees, and damages for lost wages and emotional distress. I also did something Angela did not expect. I called the local news. Portland has a consumer protection segment that covers HOA abuse, and I sent them everything. The video, the emails, the documents from Brenda, the complaint, the lawsuit. They called me back the same day and said they wanted to do a story. I said yes. They sent a reporter and a camera crew to the complex the next morning. Angela saw them and tried to shut it down. She said they were on private property and they needed to leave. The reporter said they were on a public sidewalk and they had every right to be there. Angela said she would call the police. The reporter said go ahead. The police came, same officer from before. He looked at Angela, looked at the reporter, and said unless someone was trespassing or causing a disturbance, he was not getting involved. Angela said the reporter was harassing residents. The reporter said, "We are just asking questions." The officer said that is not illegal. Angela said this was a coordinated attack. The officer said, "Ma'am, you are free to not answer questions, but I cannot make them leave." Angela stormed off. The reporter interviewed me on camera. I told the whole story. They also interviewed Brenda, who said Angela had been doing this for years and someone finally stood up to her. The story aired 3 days later. It was a 5-minute segment with the headline HOA Gone Wild. Portland residents fight back against predatory towing. It showed the video of Angela authorizing the tow, the orange stickers, the emails, and my interview. It also showed a clip of Angela refusing to comment and walking away from the camera. The segment ended with the reporter saying the management company had not responded to requests for comment, and the tow vendor was under investigation by the state. The response was immediate. The HOA Facebook group exploded. Dozens of residents came forward with their own stories about Angela. Late fees for payments that were never late. Fines for violations that did not exist. Towing threats for cars that were parked legally. Guest pass denials with no explanation. One guy said Angela had fined him $300 for having a lawn ornament she claimed violated the aesthetic guidelines, even though the guidelines did not mention ornaments. Another woman said Angela had her car towed during a family emergency because she parked in a guest spot without a pass, even though the woman had called ahead and gotten verbal approval from the management company. Brenda texted me and said, "This is it. This is the moment." She said if we organized the residents, we could force a recall vote and remove Angela from the board. I said how. She said the bylaws allowed for a special election if 20% of residents signed a petition. We had 300 units. We needed 60 signatures. She said she already had 40 from the Facebook group. I said let's do it. We spent the next week going door to door. Most people signed immediately. A few were scared. One guy said Angela had threatened to fine him if he talked to me. I said she could not do that. He said she did it anyway. I showed him the news story. He signed. By the end of the week, we had 87 signatures. We submitted the petition to the board. Frank confirmed receipt and said the special election would be held in 2 weeks. Angela tried to stop it. She sent an email saying the petition was invalid because the signatures were collected under false pretenses. Paul replied and said the petition met all legal requirements and any attempt to block the election would result in another lawsuit. Angela sent another email saying the election would proceed but the results would not be binding without board approval. Paul replied and said the bylaws did not require board approval for recall elections. Angela stopped replying. The election was scheduled for a Saturday morning at the clubhouse. I took the day off work. So did Brenda and about 50 other residents. Angela showed up with her clipboard and her stamp, looking calm, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. Frank ran the meeting. He explained the process. Residents would vote by secret ballot. A simple majority was required to remove Angela from her position. If the recall passed, the board would appoint an interim communications director until the next regular election. Angela asked to make a statement. Frank said she had 5 minutes. She stood up, walked to the front of the room, and said she had served Harbor Point for 5 years, and every decision she made was in the best interest of the community. She said people like me were trying to undermine the rules and create chaos. She said if the recall passed, the HOA would collapse and property values would plummet. She said she had done nothing wrong and the accusations against her were lies. She looked directly at me and said, "I have done this before, and people fold every time." I stood up. Frank said I would have 5 minutes to respond. I walked to the front and said I was not here to attack Angela personally. I was here to hold the board accountable. I said Angela had violated HOA rules, harassed residents, and abused her authority. I said I had proof. I pulled out my phone and played the video of Angela authorizing the tow. I played the clip of her saying she was the board and no one could overrule her. I showed the emails threatening collections and liens. I showed the orange stickers. I showed the documents Brenda had collected. I said this is not about one parking violation. This is about a pattern of abuse that has been going on for years, and no one stood up to stop it until now. Then I said one more thing. I said Angela claimed she was enforcing the rules, but the rules did not support her actions. I said I had obtained a copy of the management company contract from the county records office, and the contract had expired 8 months ago and had never been renewed. I said that meant every fine, every tow authorization, and every notice Angela had issued in the last 8 months was invalid because the management company had no legal authority to act on behalf of the HOA. I said Angela knew this, because the board had discussed the contract renewal at a meeting 6 months ago and decided to table it, and Angela had voted in favor of tabling it. I said she used the expired contract to create a paper trail that looked official, but it was all fake. The room went silent. Angela's face went white. Frank stood up and said, "Is that true?" I handed him the contract and the meeting minutes. He read them, looked at Angela, and said, "Angela, did you know the contract was expired?" Angela said the contract was being renewed. Frank said, "That is not what I asked." Angela said it was a procedural issue. Frank said it is a legal issue and you used an expired contract to authorize enforcement actions. Angela said everyone does it. Frank said no, everyone does not do it, and you just admitted you knew. That was the trump card. I had been holding it since the week after the first tow, and I waited until this moment to play it because I knew Angela would deny everything, and I needed her on record lying. The management company contract was the key. Without it, every action Angela had taken was legally void, and every fine and tow could be challenged and reversed. Paul had found the contract expiration buried in the county records, and he had coached me on how to deploy it for maximum impact. I handed the officer on scene the proof during the first tow and asked for an incident number immediately, and that incident number became part of the legal record that tied Angela to the fraud. Brenda stood up and said, "I have receipts." She pulled out her folder and started reading. Emails from Angela threatening residents with fines for violations that did not exist. Tow authorizations with forged board signatures. Board meeting minutes where Angela had altered the vote counts to make it look like her proposals passed when they had actually failed. She said, "I have been documenting this for 3 years, and I was too scared to say anything because Angela threatened to put a lien on my property." She looked at Angela and said, "You told me you have all day, and so does your fine meter. You said that to me. You said it to him. You say it to everyone. And now everyone knows." Angela tried to leave. Frank told her to sit down. She said she did not have to listen to this. Frank said if you walk out of this meeting, you are admitting guilt, and the board will remove you immediately. Angela sat down. Frank called for the vote. The ballots were distributed. People filled them out in silence. The ballots were collected and counted. Frank stood up and said the recall has passed with 78% in favor. Angela Jones is removed from the board effective immediately. Angela did not say anything. She just grabbed her clipboard and her stamp and walked out. The room erupted in applause. Brenda hugged me. Frank shook my hand and said, "I am sorry it took this long." I said it should not have taken this long. He said, "I know. And we are going to fix it." The fallout was swift. The board held an emergency meeting the next day and voted to terminate the management company contract. They hired a new company with a clean record and a transparent fee structure. They also voted to refund every fine and tow fee Angela had issued in the last 8 months. I got a check for $643. Brenda got a check for $800. Other residents got checks ranging from $50 to over $1,000. The tow vendor lost the HOA contract. The state investigation found that the vendor had been overbilling, and the owner was charged with fraud. The vendor shut down 3 months later. Angela tried to appeal the recall. Paul filed a motion to dismiss, and the judge ruled in our favor. Angela was banned from holding any HOA leadership position for 5 years. But the best part happened at the shared mailbox cluster where neighbors gather and whisper while watching. I was checking my mail one afternoon and Angela pulled up in her car. She got out, saw me, and froze. I did not say anything. I just stood there holding my mail. She walked over to her mailbox, opened it, and pulled out a stack of envelopes. One of them was from the small claims court. She opened it right there, read it, and her face went red. It was the judgment from my lawsuit. The HOA loses in small claims and pays costs. The judgment said the HOA was liable for all towing fees, storage fees, legal fees, and damages totaling $1,200. It also said Angela was personally liable for half of that amount because she had acted outside the scope of her authority. She looked at me. I looked at her. She said, "This is not over." I said, "Actually, it is." She said, "I will appeal." I said, "Go ahead." She got in her car and drove away. I never saw her at another HOA meeting. Brenda told me later that Angela moved out of the complex 2 months after the judgment, and no one knew where she went. The HOA is different now. Frank stepped down as board president and a woman named Lisa took over. Lisa is calm, reasonable, and actually reads the rules before enforcing them. The new management company sends out clear notices with specific code references and photos. No more vague threats. No more midnight emails. No more orange stickers. Parking enforcement is handled by a third-party vendor that requires photographic proof and a formal review before any tow is authorized. Guest passes are easy to get. Decals are free. The fire lanes are clearly marked and no one has been towed from a legal spot since Angela left. I still see the tow truck with the distinctive amber strobe sometimes, driving through the neighborhood on other jobs. Every time I see it, I think about Angela standing there with her clipboard, telling me she had all day. I think about her saying people fold every time. I think about the look on her face when I handed Frank the expired contract and she realized I had been recording everything from the start. If you made it this far, hit that like button and subscribe for more real HOA drama and neighborhood justice stories. Paul told me later that the case became a reference point for other HOA disputes in Oregon. He said 3 other residents in different complexes used my lawsuit as a template to fight their own boards. He said Angela's downfall sent a message that HOA leaders are not above the law and residents have rights. I said, "Good." He said, "You did something most people are too scared to do." I said, "I just did not fold." Brenda told me the Facebook group is still active and people use it to share information about HOA abuses across the city. She said someone started a website that tracks problem management companies and predatory tow vendors. She said my story is on the front page. I said I hope it helps someone. She said it already has. I got my car back the same day the judgment came through. The tow yard waived the storage fees and apologized for the inconvenience. I drove home, parked in my spot, and sat there for a minute. The lines were still freshly painted. I was still dead center, and no one was going to tow me. A few weeks after everything settled, I was walking past the clubhouse and I saw a folding sign stand someone had left outside. It was blank, no stickers, no text, just a metal frame. I remembered the day Angela tried to plant a no parking sign in front of my spot, and I caught her on video doing it. That video ended up in the lawsuit evidence packet. I smiled and kept walking. The new board held a town hall meeting to discuss long-term changes. Lisa asked for input on how to make the rules clearer and enforcement fairer. I suggested requiring photographic documentation for every violation before any fine or tow is issued. She said that was a good idea and the board voted to adopt it. Someone else suggested requiring a 48-hour notice period before any enforcement action. The board adopted that too. Angela had spent 5 years building a system designed to trap residents. It took the new board 3 months to dismantle it. I ran into Frank at the grocery store a few months later. He said he was sorry for not standing up to Angela sooner. I said you stood up when it mattered. He said I should have done it years ago. I said better late than never. He said the board is looking for someone to fill the communications director role and he thought I would be good at it. I said absolutely not. He laughed and said I figured, but I had to ask. I said I am done with HOA politics. He said I do not blame you. The truth is, I did not do this to become a hero or to run the HOA. I did it because Angela made a calculation that I would be like everyone else and just pay the fine and move on. She thought she could bully me because she had done it before and no one fought back. But I am not the one you bully. I am the guy who records everything, documents every interaction, and does not let go until the system works the way it is supposed to work. Karen claims she never came by, and the doorbell video plays. That moment happened during the second board meeting, after the recall vote but before the judgment. Angela tried to tell the new board that she had never personally authorized any tows and that the management company had acted independently. Lisa asked if that was true. I pulled out my phone and played the doorbell camera footage from the first tow. It showed Angela walking up to my door, knocking, waiting, then walking back to the tow truck and pointing at my car. The timestamp was clear. The audio was clear. Angela had personally authorized the tow, and she had lied about it under oath during the small claims hearing. Lisa asked Angela if she wanted to revise her statement. Angela said she misspoke. Lisa said that is perjury. Angela said it was a misunderstanding. Lisa said we are done here. That doorbell video became the final piece of evidence that sealed Angela's fate. Paul submitted it to the court as proof of perjury, and the judge added a penalty to the judgment. Angela was fined an additional $500 and ordered to issue a formal written apology to me and the HOA. The apology letter arrived 2 weeks later. It was one paragraph, typed, unsigned, and clearly written by a lawyer. It said Angela regretted any misunderstandings and hoped the community could move forward. I framed it and hung it in my hallway. The state investigation into the management company concluded 6 months later. The company was fined $20,000 and barred from operating in Oregon for 5 years. The owner tried to appeal, but the appeals court upheld the ruling. The tow vendor owner was sentenced to 6 months in jail and 3 years probation. Angela was not charged criminally, but the civil judgment followed her. She tried to get a job with another HOA in Washington and they rejected her after a background check flagged the lawsuit. Brenda and I still talk. She told me she feels safer now. She said she used to check her car every morning to see if there was a sticker or if it had been towed. She said she does not do that anymore. She said she parks wherever she wants as long as it is legal, and she does not worry. I said that is how it should be. She said it took you standing up to make it that way. I said it took all of us. The neighborhood is quieter now. Not boring quiet, just normal quiet. People park their cars and go to work and come home and no one is getting towed for imaginary violations. Guest passes are handed out at the clubhouse front desk with no interrogation. The board meets once a month and the meetings are boring in the best way. They talk about landscaping budgets and clubhouse maintenance and nobody yells. Angela's replacement, a guy named Tom, sends out monthly newsletters with actual useful information like street cleaning schedules and upcoming events. No threats. No fines. No drama. I still work nights. I still come home tired. I still park in my spot. And every time I park, I take a picture. Not because I think someone is going to tow me, but because I learned that documentation is power. Angela taught me that, even if she did not mean to. The funny thing is, I never wanted to fight the HOA. I just wanted to park my car and live my life. But Angela decided I was the problem, and she made it personal. She said she had all day, and so does her fine meter. She said people fold every time. She said she was the board and no one could overrule her. And every single time she said something like that, she gave me another piece of evidence. She built the case against herself, and all I had to do was record it and hand it to a lawyer. Paul told me the best legal victories are the ones where the other side defeats themselves. He said Angela could have won if she had just followed the rules. She could have measured the fire lane. She could have documented the violation properly. She could have issued a real notice with a real code reference. But she did not, because she thought she did not have to. She thought her title and her clipboard and her stamp were enough. She thought no one would check. She was wrong. The HOA still has rules. Rules are fine. Rules are necessary. But rules only work when they are applied fairly and enforced consistently. Angela did not care about fairness. She cared about control. And when you use rules as a weapon instead of a guideline, eventually someone is going to take that weapon and turn it around. Lisa told me at the last town hall that Harbor Point is a better place now. She said people feel like they can actually talk to the board without being threatened. She said complaints are handled with conversation instead of fines. She said the goal is to build a community, not a police state. I said that sounds good. She said it is good. And it happened because you did not fold. I said I just did what anyone would do. She said no, most people would have paid the fine and moved on. You fought. And you won. And you changed the whole system. I do not know if that is true. I just know that I am not getting towed anymore, and neither is anyone else. And that is enough. The last time I saw the tow truck with the distinctive amber strobe, it was driving past the complex on the main road. I was walking to my car, and the driver slowed down, looked at me, and waved. I waved back. He kept driving. I got in my car, checked the rearview mirror out of habit, and drove to work. No stickers. No threats. No Angela. A lawyer letter that forces a retraction and a refund. That is what Paul called it when he drafted the cease and desist. He said the letter was not just about stopping Angela. It was about forcing the HOA to admit they were wrong and give back the money. He said most HOAs will fight until they realize fighting costs more than settling. Harbor Point realized it fast. The board refunded every fine, every tow fee, and every bogus late charge Angela had issued. They sent out a formal letter to all residents explaining what happened and apologizing for the abuse. They promised to implement new oversight procedures and transparency requirements. And they delivered. Karen is removed as meeting chair and loses the microphone control. That happened at the first board meeting after the recall. Angela tried to attend as a resident. Lisa said she was welcome to attend, but she could not speak during board discussions. Angela said that was unfair. Lisa said you are no longer on the board and you have no authority here. Angela demanded the microphone. Lisa said no. Angela stood up and started yelling. Frank called a security guard. The security guard, a guy I recognized from the first tow day, walked over and asked Angela to leave. She refused. He said, "Ma'am, you are disrupting the meeting, and if you do not leave, I will have to call the police." She left. She never came back. The microphone thing was symbolic, but it mattered. Angela had controlled every meeting for 5 years. She decided who got to speak, how long they could speak, and whether their complaints were valid. She used the microphone as a gavel, cutting people off mid-sentence and shutting down any dissent. Losing that control was worse for her than losing the board seat, because it meant she was just another resident with no power and no platform. She could not handle it. I heard from Brenda that Angela tried to start a rival HOA Facebook group to undermine Lisa and the new board. She posted a long rant about how the recall was illegal and how I had manipulated the residents with lies and fake documents. No one joined. The post got 2 comments, both telling her to move on. She deleted the group a week later. The state investigation report was made public, and a local news blog picked it up. The headline was, "Former HOA leader abused power for years. Residents say enough." The article quoted me, Brenda, and 3 other residents. It included photos of the orange stickers, the expired management contract, and the small claims judgment. It ended with a quote from Paul saying HOA boards are not kingdoms and leaders are not kings, and residents have the right to demand accountability. The article went viral in local HOA reform circles. Paul said he got a dozen calls from people asking for help with their own boards. I do not know what Angela is doing now. I do not care. She is gone, the system is better, and life is normal. That is all I wanted. Glad you could make it to the end.